April, yeah.
April.
Episode
Sexy First
3,
Friday.
here we are. Can't believe it's been 3 months already.
So we're talking about type today, which is kind of funny that it took us till the third one to talk about type. And last week we talked about dominant instinct. I see Nian. Hi, Nian. So we'll just briefly reintroduce ourselves. I'm sure everyone knows us by now, and Lindsay can tell us a little bit about what we're doing today. We'll dive right in because we're trying to do 9 types in less than half an hour. So I'm Sam E. Greenberg. I'm a sexuality researcher and an Enneagram coach specializing in sex and relationships. And my doctoral research is on the Enneagram and sexual desire. And specifically, I originally designed my research around type, so this is my favorite topic. And I also do some research around dominant instinct and subtype.
And I am Lindsay Frazier, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified sex therapist out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I specialize in relationships and sexuality.
And I'm a type 5.
Oh, yes, I always forget to say that. I am a type 9 social with sexual instinct in the repressed position, which I think says a lot. So, but yes, so today we are going all into type. And well, first off, I wanted to say thank you to everybody that sent ideas. We got a lot of ideas of things that people would like us to address and to talk about when we are doing these lives. And a lot of you sent things to Sam and I, and we have a whole list created. And you all had great and wonderful ideas, so please keep sending those in. We did a poll, and it seemed like type was the thing that people wanted to talk about this week, but we definitely love all the things that you said, so keep doing that, please. So today we're going into type, and as we talked about last time, we started with the instinctual stackings, and that, the instinctual stackings are going to set sort of that framework, right? And so we talked a little bit about sort of how you're going to be more similar, say someone that has a similar instinctual stacking than you might be to someone that has the type. So today we're going to go into the type a little bit and the nuance that comes with that. But to keep in mind that the instinct is going to be the framework, and what we're talking about today is the little nuances that the type brings in. And Sam is going to start today with sort of the research findings and the things that she has. And I'm going to come in and sort of back that up with some clinical practice examples and things that I have seen in clients. And knowing that today is going to be pretty brief and just kind of a touch point, because as Sam said, we have 9 types to go through, and we decided it's more important that we get a little touch point every single one than to focus more on one than the other. That being said, we would love to go more in depth on certain types and things like that as well. So if there's a type that you are or you want to hear more about, definitely let us know, because we know that we're just going to give you a tidbit today, and you're like, but I want more. So we know that. And we look forward to sharing a little bit of information we have on each type. I'll let you take it away, Sam. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, oh, go ahead. We're going to divide it into triad for just ease of organizing. So we'll talk about feeling triad first, and we'll go through all 3, and then we'll move on to thinking triad. Also, I have a tiny cold. I'm getting over a cold. Apparently, we're switching off who's sick at each Sexy First Friday. So if I am drinking a lot of tea and I sound sick, that's why. So
no, I think we're ready for you to take it away. And we're going to start with feeling types. So we're doing a little bit different than what you might typically see. But I'll let Sam start with the research that she's seen for the heart and feeling types.
So, like I said, my original research was designed specifically on types, so there's a lot of data on each type. Today, I'm just going to share about one finding for each, and we'll talk about that. So, starting with type 2s. 2s have the highest sensitivity to what's called emotional bonding cues. Emotional bonding cues for sexual desire. So there's different types of sexual desire cues, things that make us feel desire. And twos have the highest sensitivity of all types to emotional bonding cues. So what emotional bonding cues are, some examples would be like feeling a sense of love with a partner, your partner does special or loving things for you, you're experiencing emotional closeness with a partner, your partner expresses an interest in hearing about you. So those are things not necessarily sexual, but in this case, twos reported that these things make them feel sexual desire. So that's one conclusion about twos. And actually, I have a second one for twos, which is that twos say that their partner's pleasure is more important than their own. So twos are more likely than any other type to say, my partner's pleasure is more important than mine. I think we could probably predict that. And also we know that twos have very high empathy and high desire for caring for others. They also have a high desire to be cared for themselves and a difficulty expressing their needs. So in terms of the emotional bonding cues, you can imagine why a two would be turned on by a partner doing stuff for them without them having to ask for it. And you can imagine as one of the most empathetic types why twos would be putting their partner's pleasure above
and I think, based on what you're saying, Sam, I think that actually twos end up being some of the most interesting around sexuality that come into my office. They're going to have a little bit more even nuance sort of within their types. So like one of the things that I do see for twos in particular is that sex sometimes becomes the mechanism to actually earn love. So there can be almost a detachment from like what is the role of sex and what it means for me. And so sometimes what I will see is that they will use sex as a way to sort of get the partner's interest. They're really hyperly focused on like what the other person wants and needs for them. They oftentimes actually don't know what they need or want. And so like what's really interesting is like even the difference between men and women that are twos. So for two women that are twos, sometimes what I will see is like once they're like emotionally connected and bonded and within the relationship, like sex doesn't quite serve the same purpose. They might not have as much interest. They may not want sex as much. And so then their partners come in and it's sort of this complaint of like lower sexual desire. And it's really interesting sort of how that dynamic will play out. But on the opposite end, men that are twos get hyper focused on sex being the thing that they need to have to receive love. So like when sex is not happening, they can almost become anxious about it. And like, do you love me? Do you not love me? We're not having sex enough. And so it's been really interesting that way. And then there tends to be with twos in general, like just functioning issues or difficulty more often that I see with twos than I might see with other clients, like orgasmic issues, difficulty reaching orgasm or having orgasm, sexual pain, these types of things that play out with twos as well. And then when sex isn't happening, there's a fear that they're not desirable or loved as well. So that's a little bit of what I see for twos.
Oh my gosh, I feel like we could spend this whole session just on twos.
We could on almost every type.
Yeah. Follow up. We'll think about that. We'll dive in maybe in depth more in future sessions. But unfortunately, we have to move on right away to threes. So for threes, what we see is high sensitivity to what's called visual proximity cues. So we just talked about emotional bonding cues. Now we're on visual proximity cues. Those are going to be things like seeing or talking to someone powerful, someone classy, someone wealthy, someone interesting, someone well-dressed. Sort of proximity, the word proximity means like proximity to these desirable qualities. So for threes, they express that these proximity cues are a big turn on for them. I think, again, we could predict this. Now, there's going to be some things that make sense and some things that we wouldn't have predicted. But we know threes are status conscious, and they sometimes conflate sex with success. Like the sexual partner might be a sign of success. The sexual the achievements in bed they might consider to be part of their success. So to me, it makes sense that they are turned on by these visual proximity cues that have to do with being in proximity to powerful or successful successful people, or, and people they might
And
admire.
what I think is interesting when I see threes sort of in the clinical practice is one, it can become kind of performative. And I think that we're going to talk more about sort of the role of different triads, but like I think with them being an attachment triad is sometimes there's like, I'm trying to figure out like how I need to perform sexually to sort of have you see me as someone that's precious or admirable or successful. And it's really interesting sort of, so they may not always know what they like or want either, because they're not well aware of like, well, I'm paying attention to like what you would see or want from me versus what I would want. One of the things I think is really funny that I had as an example one time, which I think goes off of sort of what you're saying too, is like, is your partner impressive? So sometimes if they don't view the partner that that they're not impressive enough, there can sort of be like, well, you're not as impressive as I'd like you to be, so I'm not as interested in having sex with you right now. I actually had a client say that in practice, like, well, I mean, you're kind of like not really doing the things you said you do, and you're like kind of failing at your job, and like, I don't know, like, why would I want to have sex with that? So I think, I mean, harsh and hard to hear, but also interesting sort of like that desire and want to sort of like, I think kind of what you said, Sam, too, like we both need to be impressive for sort of sex to work well.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving on to fours. Fours report high desire, basically across all measures, but especially high participants in BDSM, along with eights the highest. And they're sensitive to most types of cues. So yes, emotional bonding, and romantic types of cues, but also the visual proximity we just discussed, explicit erotic cues, which I'll discuss later. Basically, fours are pretty sensitive to all desire cues. And when I think about why this might be, I think for fours, we have the strong sense of something missing. And we have the desire sometimes for a rescuer to come, save me, I need rescuing. For all of those reasons, I think, and many others probably, fours express high desire, but it may not feel the same inside of their body subjectively as like the desire of an eight, which we'll talk about later. So even though fours are consistently expressing almost as high a desire as eights, which are the highest desire type, I think for them it might be a little bit motivated by a little bit of different factors.
And what I see with fours in particular is this romanticization of sort of like what sex means. And so they do have to have a connection to the partner. They are the ones that like, it is about sort of that like, they have to feel close and connected and kind of like wanting that desire to come back and forth. And so for me it's more about the sensuality than it is actually about the act of sex for fours. And like what I've noticed is that even it doesn't matter what the like dominant instinctual stacking is, that all fours sort of have this desire and want sort of in my practice. And sometimes that longing for like their partner isn't quite what they want them to be, and this like idea of sort of this other person that will fulfill all of their romantic, sexual, sensual sort of needs. And so there can also be like that sense of deficiency of like things are just not quite what I need or want within the partner. And so that can also be frustrating for partners that are in relationship with them, and sort of that ability to be like, well, where do I stand, and like how is that, like I can't ever quite live up to what you want of me.
Yeah, there's a big fantasizing component, like a big imaginal.
Very much so, more so than any other type, I would say, personally, from what I've seen.
Lindsay, I think we're definitely gonna have to do at least like a session on thinking types and do 10 minutes on each, because this is it feels so much like we're shortchanging them by not getting into the details. But let's call this like the thesis statement. This is the overview paragraph, and we can always delve in more in future Sexy First Fridays. So that was feeling types, super brief overview. We're gonna move to thinking types. So starting with fives. So fives score towards the middle of types on most measures, but they actually have the lowest. They report the absolute lowest dyadic sexual desire. That means desire for partnered sex. of any type. And this is so funny to me, they report the lowest responsivity to all desire cues. So all types of desire cues. Fives are at the bottom in terms of feeling sexually responsive. What's interesting about this is like fives do report that they have interest in sex. They watch porn, you know, they've tried BDSM, but desire related to partner, like cues that are coming from partners and desire to have sex with a partner is way lower. And I was telling Lindsay, like, I'm a little bit baffled by this because I have the hardest time hypothesizing and figuring out fives as a five. It's just like my blind spot. But I think, you know, fives are really committed to independence, lowering the needs and to, you know, to the point of not having any needs, any need to rely on other people. And I think that's probably coming.
I think it's really interesting that you say that, because like I have a lot of couples come into my office where a partner is, and again, I get mostly self-preservation fives, but the complaint is that there isn't a lot of relational sex happening. And what I kind of find is that for them, it's like, that's a lot of energy to sort of go into that, and they oftentimes would rather put their energy into the other things that they are more interested or focused in. So like, you know, I've had it where it's like, well, I'd rather play a video game than have sex because it feels like a lot of energy to sort of move towards sex. But they are still engaging in individual sexuality. So I think that is really interesting. There is still pornography use. There is still self-pleasure happening and occurring. They can also kind of have some like secretive sexual lives. Like I've been very fascinated sometimes with things that you wouldn't anticipate or expect. And I was like, oh, I wouldn't have anticipated or expected that. And then, you know, once they're comfortable with you, they might, you know, share a little bit more sort of about that as well. But yeah, it's very interesting, sort of that dynamic. And I confirm that from what I see with mostly self-preservation fives that I see in my office.
Yeah, Lauren says a huge aversion to vulnerability and worry they might not be confident. I definitely see that worry that they might not be confident playing out with male fives a lot. And then, yes, the aversion to vulnerability that happens with partner intimacy. And then, Lindsay, to your point about things you wouldn't expect fives to be into, fives do have like the internal mind palace, and their sexuality is often happening in their internal mind palace. That means like fantasies, like up to and including kind of like off the beaten path types of fantasies. So fives are sexual beings, but not as much in the dyadic or the intimate sphere. Okay, moving on to sixes. So sixes score pretty low across most measures of desire overall. But comparatively, they do score high on emotional bonding cues, which is the same set of cues I brought up about twos. On its face, you wouldn't necessarily expect that, but the way emotional bonding cues are measured in the instruments that I used, yes, there's everything I mentioned for twos, like a partner doing special things for you, loving things for you. But there's also a huge aspect of relationship safety and stability implicit within this. So it's talking about the future together, feeling a sense of commitment from your partner, like feeling like your partner's supportive of you, feeling a sense of security in your relationship, feeling protected by a partner. That's all part of emotional bonding cues. So sixes score relatively high on this, given that they score low on most things. And I think, you know, that makes sense given the focus of sixes on safety and security. Often we say sixes are pretty sexually open partners, pretty like willing to try things, but they really need to feel secure and safe. Like the future of my relationship is assured, and I need to know what's happening and have like a full sense of what's going on before it happens, and then I'm really open.
I agree with all the things that you just said, Sam, as far as what I see with my sixes in my office. They are really open to and willing to sort of try anything, but they need to know ahead of time. So it's really important if you're in a partnership with a six that like you are having that opportunity to like have that conversation ahead of time with them, like what you're hoping for and needing and wanting sort of within the sexual relationship. So it's sort of like have that conversation and have it a couple times. And if they know what to anticipate, they will go there with you. They also do need to have that reassurance and sort of that security within the relationship, or there might be a little bit of sort of like, you know, not wanting to engage in sexual activity if that isn't there. So they need to feel that like we're in a good place to sort of move forward with that. But like one of the things I recommend with my sixes is like, sit down, have the conversation. I had a 5-6 couple in my office, and like she's just like, I just need to know. If I know what's going to happen, I will do whatever you want. And we got in the habit with them of just like, they would have these conversations. They set aside intentional time to talk about what they needed or wanted, and they have a much more satisfying sexual life because he was trying to kind of just bring in things. She's like, well, wait a minute, I don't know if I want that or not. But she was willing to do all the things he wanted. It just needed to be conversed about beforehand.
Yes, exactly. And Christy says, I know a one who also needs that plan ahead combo. Yeah, we'll talk about one. That makes sense. So going to sevens, sevens express really pretty high desire across measures. So I've talked before, sevens, eights, and fours are the highest desire types in terms of at least my study. So yes, sevens express high desire across measures. They express that they value their own pleasure more than the partner's pleasure. I don't want to pick on sevens. I know that's like, that sounds kind of bad, but it's not that they don't value the partner's pleasure at all or something. It's just that they value their pleasure. And I think that makes sense when we know that on other previous research, we've seen sevens have a little bit of lower scores on like compassion scales. Like sevens are enthusiastic and loving partners, but like the compassion empathy piece is a little bit less high than some other types. So I think it sort of stands to reason that they would say like, yes, my partner's pleasure is important, but like not more important than my own.
Yeah, I mean, what I see with sevens in particular, sex is supposed to be just all about fun. And so when they have a partner that like wants to be more particular or have conversations about it, it's really interesting. Like they are more kind of spontaneous and kind of go with the flow around sexuality until a partner has a complaint. And so when I have partners in my office where their partner is a seven, they have a complaint, they will actually get overly anxious and then almost have this spinning of wheels sort of in their head. And so oftentimes what I will happen in my office is that the seven had no clue that there was any issues or concerns around the sexual relationship. A partner makes a complaint and then they hyperfixate on that complaint to the point that they have almost difficulty sort of functioning in the sexuality. It was really interesting to me to actually see that because I've actually had a lot of more seven men than women that sort of had this fixation around like, oh my gosh, like I haven't been doing sex right, and my partner wants this, and my partner wants that, and this just jointedness sort of around the sexuality. So it's like, it's fun until it's not fun. It's sort of what I have seen around the dynamic around sevens. And they are, you're right, they're more focused on themselves until someone like switches the focus to them.
Okay, instinct types, we only have 6 minutes, so we're gonna do like hyperspeed. Okay, so eights score highest, not just high, but highest on almost every single measure. Porn use, BDSM participation, overall desire, almost all the desire cues. And I could say more, but I'll skip it for now. I think we can understand like eights with lust. They have high energy, they have high sexual energy. Eights are the most sexually assertive type. That just is like their personality playing out in the sexual.
Yeah, what I see is sex is about being alive for an eight. They do tend to have more intensity with their touch, and so that can be difficult for some types that have a little bit more sensitivity, or they're more like it can be like overwhelming sometimes for partners because they tend to, everything that they do is sort of big and intense sexually. And so I've had some people come in and be like, whoa, could you like not slap my butt so hard, you know, for instance, or could you not grab me so hard? And they don't even know that they're doing it. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of AIDS. I think I'm like, oh my gosh, Steph, we could give a whole 30 minutes to each type. But yes, it's the intensity and it's the being alive, and that sex is a way that they do that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we might have to do one for each type. We'll have to think about it. So nines score kind of in the middle or towards the bottom on most things, but they are by far the least sexually assertive type. And along with twos, they're the most likely to say my partner's pleasure is more important than my own. So, due to the merging or whatever other aspect of nines would be sort of loath to express or even to know what their own sexual needs are. And they would be happy or fine with putting a partner's pleasure above.
Yeah, and I would confirm that. So like one of the things that I will see in the therapeutic practice is that, somebody comes in with a partner that's a 9 and they're like, well, what do you like? And the 9's like, doesn't know how to answer because they're looking to the other person to sort of give them that feedback and how do I accommodate what you need or want. And they're also hyper tuned into sort of what's happening with the partners. Like if they were to sort of be a little bit more assertive and they get a response from their partner, they're sort of like, okay, like I can't do that. And so like I think you can't ask a 9 what they like. The best way is to like get a sexuality book. Like one of the ones that I have is like just a little bit kinky or not. I can't remember exactly the full title of it, but it's like give them the platform to have the conversation and then they can tell you. Actually, that'll be great for anybody, but 9s in particular don't oftentimes know what they like. They accommodate the partner sexually based on what they like.
Absolutely. Okay, finally and quickly, we have type 1s. 1s score very low on all measures. Like, they're like 8th in porn use, 9th in BDSM participation, 7th in overall desire. They're pretty low on every measure and every type of desire cue, although they fall in the middle for sexual assertiveness and they fall in the middle for valuing a partner's pleasure. But for 1s, they may experience a barrier to not even feeling sexual desire, but allowing sexual desire to kind of permeate their consciousness because they have all these ideas around responsibility, moral judgment, maybe around some of these things like porn or whatever, that are being a barrier in their own body to just allowing their desires within them.
See a few things with 1s. Like Erin Christie had mentioned, 1s sort of know what's going to happen as well, and they tend to not always have the space or time for sexuality. Like it needs to be part of the plan. It's like one of the huge things that I give 1s as like the homework or the thing to do is plan spontaneity. So like it's planning time for connection. So I call it like a essential romantic connective day, where it's like you set aside 3 to 4 hours for that connection with your partner and with the opportunity for sex to happen. If 1s don't schedule it, it often doesn't happen. Again, instinct will play into this. Your sexual 1s might push through that a little bit better. They also have really sensitive bodies in general, so they're going to be a little bit more, how you touch them is really big. So I do see a lot of my 1s have like touch can kind of like hurt or like they don't like, so it's you really got to play with touch a little bit with 1s as well, because they tend to be more rigid and they kind of hold their bodies more tensely in general, and so how touch feels really different for them than it may feel for other types, and that can be really hard when maybe somebody else wants really firm touch, or like, so like there's a lot of like, don't do it this way, don't do it that way, and a lot of like having to like figure out like what is the right way to sort of touch me and to know about the sensitivity in their body. So if you're in a relationship with 1, really talking to them like what kind of touch feels good, because it can oftentimes not be the type of touch maybe that, well, I have an 8 and 1 relationship, so you can imagine sort of how that one works out a little bit, right? Intensity and wanting sensitive touch or more sensual touch. So that's one thing I see with 1s in particular as well. I know we had to go through these really quickly.
That went so fast. I want to just kind of bring it all together and say one thing, which is that in my experience working with people and research, sexuality can be the thing that gets you to transcend these patterns in some sense. Like when you're having absolute intimacy with your partner where you sort of like cease to be your own being at the moment of orgasm, like you're not an ego, you're just experience. So we can have sexuality like getting us past these patterns that Lindsay and I are talking about. But often, and I'd say say for the majority of your sexual interactions, your ego structure, your personality, your type is playing out in some way. So it's not that these things are going on every single second that you're ever having sex. There's going to be some times that you transcend it. But if your ego is at play, these would be the ways that it is. So message us what you want to hear more about. We definitely need to go more in depth on these types. This is just a little tiny overview. And thanks for coming.
I was just going
to
say too, like, when you're thinking about sexuality, there's so many more complex issues that sort of go into it. And so this is just giving you just a little bit of a taste of the nuance that the type will bring. And I know that Sam and I are really excited to continue this conversation and go more in depth on types as well.
Let us know what you want to see next month, and we'll both be posting content about this for the rest of April. So check out both of our Instagrams.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Happy First Friday.
Bye.